When the phone rang that morning, I almost did not answer. It was not the usual kind of ring, not the polite hum of modern life, but something old, something heavy. It carried a weight that pressed against the ribs before a single word was spoken. The kind of sound that makes you understand, without logic or reason, that something is about to end. Outside, frost had begun to crawl across the window. The glass shimmered with thin white veins, like memory etched in ice. I watched it form patterns, roots, rivers, maps of a world I once belonged to. The morning light was weak, hesitant, as if the day itself were afraid to begin. When I finally lifted the receiver, I heard the pause before the voice. And in that pause, a breath, a tremor, a silence that felt like recognition. Then the words came, soft but certain. They said her name, my mother's name. That was the moment the past began to breathe again. My name is Eleanor Ward. I teach art history at a small university where students believe paintings never move. They study brushstrokes and technique, and speak about color as if it were science, not soul. I used to believe that too. That art was safe, something you could analyze without ever letting it touch you. But that morning proved me wrong. Because when the past decides to move, it moves through everything. Through time. Through blood. Through the echo of a name you swore you would never say again. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Because maybe you have also received a call like that. A voice that does not come from the present, but from the part of your life you buried carefully, and never completely. I had not seen the house in 20 years. My mother's house. Our house. That strange Victorian creature that stood on the edge of the moors, with its towers and stained glass eyes. I used to dream about it, though in the dreams it was always breathing. The curtains would pulse, the floors would sigh, and the portraits would whisper to one another like relatives at a funeral. Now, with her gone, it waited again. The lawyer had called me the night before, his voice formal, rehearsed. There was a will, he said, a matter of inheritance. My younger sister, Vivian, had already arrived. The words felt practical, almost sterile. But beneath them I heard what he did not say. The past is open again, and it is waiting for you to walk in. The drive was long and gray. The road stretched through the countryside like a vein. Pale, endless, familiar in a way that made my stomach ache. Every mile carried a taste of childhood I had tried to forget. The smell of rain on stone. The sound of crows in winter. The memory of my mother's perfume. Something floral, sharp, unforgettable. I remember passing the orchard where we used to play. The trees were bare now, their branches skeletal against the sky. It looked like the bones of time itself. For a moment I thought I saw someone there, a figure near the old fence. But when I blinked, there was nothing. Grief does that. It blurs the edges between what is seen and what remembers being seen. By the time I reached the gate, evening was already folding in. The house stood ahead, proud and weary, its windows dim with dust. Every detail felt intact, the iron gate still reluctant to open, the gravel drive still whispering under the tires like a voice clearing its throat. Even the air was the same, dense, perfumed with damp wood and forgotten rituals. I stopped the car and just sat there. My hands trembled slightly on the wheel. The last time I had been here was the night I swore I would never return. That vow now lay broken between me and the frost. When I entered, the first thing that hit me was the smell. A mix of varnish, turpentine, and something faintly sweet. Lilies, maybe, or the memory of them. The house had kept everything. The same carpet, the same velvet drapes, the same portrait watching from the end of the hall. Only the silence had grown thicker. The portrait had always been there. The matriarch, my great-grandmother. A woman with eyes so alive they seemed to hold a second light. As a girl, I used to talk to her when no one else would listen. My mother used to scold me for it. She said portraits were for admiration, not conversation. Now, standing before her again, I felt something in the air shift, a tiny quiver, as though the room had inhaled. Eleanor. Her voice broke the spell. Vivian. She stood in the doorway, composed as ever, her silhouette framed by the dying light. Even in mourning she looked like control-made flesh, hair pinned perfectly, scarf tied with precision, face calm and unreadable. "Hello, Vivian," I said. The words sounded formal, brittle, like porcelain about to crack. She stepped forward, heels clicking on the floor. "I thought you might not come." I almost didn't. Her eyes flicked toward the portrait. "She always said you had your grandmother's stubbornness. And you had her approval." The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. We walked through the rooms like strangers inside a shared dream. The furniture stood like witnesses. Teacups still in pairs. Books still stacked by color. Every object screamed of order, the kind of order that hides fear. Our mother's presence clung to everything, as though the walls themselves refused to release her. Vivian handed me an envelope. "Mother's lawyer will meet us tomorrow. Everything's arranged," she said, in that careful tone of hers. Her perfume was the same as ever, white jasmine and pride. It filled the room until it felt like there was no air left for either of us. I wanted to ask if she had cried, but I already knew the answer. That night, sleep would not come. The walls whispered in their old rhythm. The clock in the hallway ticked too loudly, each second heavier than the last. I could almost hear the hum of the old oil lamps and the faint scratch of something, brushes maybe, moving across canvas. At last, I left the bed and walked down the hall barefoot. The floorboards recognized me. They creaked in greeting. The portrait was waiting, bathed in a pale wash of moonlight. For a moment, I could have sworn her eyes glimmered. Then I saw it, the curve of her mouth. A smile, soft, deliberate, alive. Something inside me clenched, because that smile had never been there before. I stepped closer. The air smelled of turpentine and violets, the kind of scent that belongs to unfinished work. The paint on the canvas shimmered faintly, as if it had been touched recently. "Mother?" I whispered. It was absurd, but the word came on its own, without permission. The silence that followed was not empty. It was listening. If this story already feels familiar, stay with me. You might find echoes of yourself here. Morning arrived gray and reluctant. Vivian was already in the kitchen, perfect as always. Coffee, newspapers, papers stacked neatly beside her. She looked up only once. "We should start going through the items today," she said. "The appraiser will need access." Of course. Her efficiency irritated me, but more than that, it hurt. Because I realized she had already moved into the role our mother left behind, and I was once again the visitor. She glanced at me with that careful mix of concern and condescension. "Are you all right, Eleanor? You look pale." "I saw the portrait last night." "Yes, I noticed you staring at it. It is only a painting." "Perhaps." But she looked uneasy when she said it. Later, when she left for town, I stood again in the great hall.
The morning light filtered through the stained glass, breaking into soft bands of gold and blue. Dust floated through the air like the breath of the house itself. And there, at the far end, the portrait gleamed faintly, as if the pigments remembered sunlight better than the walls remembered warmth. I walked closer. The air grew warmer, almost alive. My fingertips brushed the edge of the frame.
The wood pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath the surface. For a moment, I thought I heard a sigh. Low, feminine, familiar. And then the faintest flicker of gold light rippled through the canvas. My mother once told me that every painting carries the energy of the hand that made it, that the brush holds memory. I used to smile politely when she said that. But now, standing there, I could feel it. A presence behind the paint, watching through color and light, waiting to be seen. And if you are still here, maybe this house has called you too. Because some legacies do not begin with what we inherit, but with what refuses to let us forget. Morning arrived dressed in fog, the kind that softens everything, even grief. Vivian was already awake, sitting at the dining table with the lawyer, a thin man with gray hair and the voice of someone who had read too many wills. The documents were neatly arranged between them, paper stacked like gravestones. I poured myself a cup of coffee I would not drink. The air smelled of damp paper and candle wax. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read. To my daughters, Vivian and Eleanor Ward, my life's work, my house, my possessions, and the portrait of our family matriarch are to be given to the daughter who best preserves the name of the family. He paused, perhaps expecting one of us to speak. Neither did. That phrase, the daughter who best preserves the name, hung in the room like a judgment. It sounded less like inheritance and more like a test. Vivian smiled faintly, a gesture rehearsed over years of entitlement. I believe Mother made her intentions clear, she said. Her tone was silk over steel. The lawyer nodded politely, misunderstanding everything. He continued listing assets, figures, and dates. Words that filled the room without meaning. I barely heard him. Because across the hall, through the open door, I could see the portrait. And the light was changing again. The morning sun, weak and silver, slid through the stained glass and fell directly onto the woman's painted face. The shadows seemed to breathe. Her eyes, those dark, glinting eyes, looked alive again. But what caught me off guard was the mouth. A smile. Small, subtle, but there. And I knew. It had not been there yesterday morning. My breath caught. I blinked once, twice. Vivian followed my gaze. What are you looking at? She asked. The portrait, I said softly. It looks different. She glanced, impatient. It is only the light. Everything looks different in this house. You always had an overactive imagination. Perhaps. But when I turned back to the portrait, the light seemed to flicker. And for the briefest instant, I could have sworn that the smile widened. The lawyer left before noon, relieved to escape the atmosphere of our inheritance. Vivian followed him to the door, already speaking of renovations, of repairs, of what needed to be modernized. She was making lists. She was always making lists. When she disappeared upstairs, I lingered in the hall. The silence there had a pulse. The house seemed to hum, not loudly, but insistently, like a memory struggling to stay alive. I stepped closer to the portrait. The eyes met mine again. And this time, I felt it. A warmth radiating from the canvas. Subtle but real. The kind of warmth that does not belong to sunlight. I whispered, "Who are you smiling at?" And somewhere deep inside the house, a door creaked open on its own. Later, I found Vivian in our mother's room, going through drawers. The air was thick with the scent of her perfume, old rose and starch. Vivian was holding one of the silk scarves our mother always wore. "I think I will take these," she said. "Mother would want me to have them." Her certainty was sharp enough to cut through the air. "Maybe she wanted us to share," I offered. Vivian looked at me the way she always did when she wanted to remind me of my place. Some things cannot be divided, Eleanor. You, of all people, should know that. Her words stung more than they should have. Because she was right. Some things refused to split. But not for the reasons she believed. That evening, the wind rose. The trees outside the windows swayed, their shadows moving like restless hands. Vivian retired early, claiming exhaustion. I stayed awake. The house would not let me rest. I lit a candle and opened the old leather-bound notebook I had found in the library. One of my mother's, I thought. The pages smelled of smoke and time, but when I looked closer, I saw the handwriting was not hers. The letters were older, more deliberate. It was signed Margaret W., the name of our great-grandmother, the woman in the portrait. The ink had faded, but one line remained clear enough to read. We paint what we cannot forgive. I closed the book.
The flame of the candle flickered wildly, though no draft had entered the room. Somewhere behind me, the portrait whispered, a faint sound, like the sweep of a brush across linen. Tell me, what do you think we truly inherit from those who came before us? Objects, names, or the weight of what they could not heal? The next morning, Vivian's mood was colder. She spoke little,
but I could sense something in her posture. A stiffness, a shadow of unease. At breakfast, she avoided the hall altogether. Are you planning to stay long? She asked. I do not know yet. Well, I suppose someone needs to keep things moving. There is much to handle. I nodded. But as she spoke, I saw her glance, quick, nervous, toward the doorway that led to the portrait. She had seen something too. She just refused to name it. By afternoon, the air grew heavy. Storm clouds pressed low against the fields. The house darkened, its corners deeper, its echoes louder. Vivian and I met in the study to sort through papers. As she bent over the desk, the light shifted again. A sudden flare from the window caught the frame of the portrait. The woman's eyes gleamed, and the faint smile appeared once more. But this time, it was unmistakable. A smile meant for me. Vivian froze. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned. What did you do? Nothing, I whispered. The warmth radiating from the painting was undeniable now. The air shimmered with it. Vivian stepped back, color draining from her face. This house feels strange, she murmured. It always has, I said. Perhaps now it finally feels like itself. That night, thunder rolled across the moors. The house shuddered softly, like a living thing remembering its breath. I sat in the great hall, the candlelight trembling. Vivian's footsteps echoed upstairs, pacing, pacing, pacing. Then silence. I looked at the portrait again. The smile was gone, replaced by something quieter, almost tender. The eyes seemed to hold an apology I could not yet understand. I whispered, Am I the one you chose? The flame bent toward the canvas, flickering once, as if in answer. Vivian appeared behind me. Her voice cracked through the quiet. You are talking to it now? I turned slowly. Her face was pale, her expression tight. Do you not feel it? I asked. The warmth? The presence? There is no presence, Eleanor. There is only your need to feel special. You always needed something to prove you mattered. Her words landed hard, the way only family can wound. I did not come here to fight, I said softly. No, she replied. You came here to take what was never yours. Then she turned sharply and left, the echo of her footsteps fading up the stairs. A second later, a picture frame on the wall fell. No wind, no movement, just fell. Glass shattered across the floor. The house exhaled. And in that breath, I felt the dividing line draw itself. There are moments when reality itself seems to choose sides, when what is alive inside you responds to what is alive outside you. That night, the house chose. Not loudly, not cruelly, just surely. A subtle rearranging of air, a quiet recognition of truth. Vivian slept in our mother's bed that night. I stayed awake in the hall. Between us, the portrait watched. Its silence no longer felt empty. It felt aware. Stay until the end. Some truths only reveal themselves in silence. By the third night, the house had learned my breathing. Or perhaps I had learned its. Either way, we were listening to one another again. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the walls. Water ticked in the gutters like a soft clock. The air tasted of iron and damp wood. In the great hall, the candlelight made a small island of warmth, leaving the corners to their whispering. I sat on the floor beneath the portrait, a blanket around my shoulders, my notes open in my lap. The leather notebook I found, signed by Margaret, our great-grandmother, waited beside me, silent and patient, as if it knew I would have to earn what it kept. I told myself I would only sit there for a moment, just until the shiver left my spine. It never did. There was a sound I had forgotten, and now could not stop hearing. Not footsteps, not the shifting sigh of old wood. It was the slow, faithful drag of a brush across linen, the breath between strokes, the faint kiss and lift, as if someone were working in the next room, painting with the light left over from other lives. "Who were you?" I asked the woman on the wall, before we decided what to call you. Her eyes held, not stern, not kind, simply present, as if presence were a kind of mercy that had not known how to receive. The room cooled and warmed in subtle waves. When my breath steadied, I saw it again. Barely a shift, more suggestion than fact. The corners of her mouth softened. Not the deliberate smile from the day before. Something else. Something like recognition. I stood and set the candle on a pedestal beside the frame. The varnish caught the flame and returned it as a low gold. The gold moved, not across the painted face, but along the inner edge of the frame itself, like a thread waking under bark. The frame had 4 tiny screws anchoring the backing board. I thought of my mother's hands. How sure they always were when they arranged and cleaned and preserved. I should not remove anything, I told myself. I should not touch what held the past in place. But the echo of brushstrokes was so gentle, so insistent, that even my caution felt like a misunderstanding. The screwdriver was still in the small drawer of the pedestal table, right where my mother would have left it. Some habits are more resilient than love. One by one, I loosened the screws. Each release sounded like a small permission. When the last thread uncoiled, I slid the backing board away, and felt a breath of cool air from inside the wall, as if the house had a hidden mouth and finally exhaled. There was a thin envelope tucked behind the canvas. Blue ribbon, wax seal half worn. My name was not on it, and yet it felt addressed to me. The ribbon let go with a sigh. Inside, 2 letters, one written by Margaret, one by my mother. The paper was fragile, but the ink had a stubborn faith in itself. I read the first one aloud, barely above a whisper, to the woman who had waited decades to hear her own voice returned. Daughter, I chose the pose that would hurt the least. I told the painter to soften the mouth, to make me look more merciful than I felt. We paint what we cannot forgive. I asked him to leave the background dark. Truth is easier to hide where shadows collect. If the day ever comes when this house can bear the weight of what it kept, the frame will loosen. The one who finds these words will be the one who hears the living from the still. I read it twice. The line about the background would not leave me. Truth is easier to hide where shadows collect. The second letter was shorter. My mother's handwriting was exact as ever, but the letters tipped as if she had been writing on an unsteady table. I kept your grandmother's confession where no one would think to look. I told myself I did it for preservation. Perhaps I did it out of fear. I do not know which of you will read this first. If it is you, Vivian, keep the name. If it is you, Eleanor, keep the heart. If you can, keep one another. I was not brave enough to do all three. The candle flickered so hard it almost went out. The hall inhaled with me, and the flames stood taller. Mother, I said, and this time the word did not feel absurd. It felt like the correct pronunciation of a wound. Behind me, on the stairs, a soft step paused. I turned to find no one there, and yet the scent of jasmine, her perfume, moved across the air that held my childhood like a pressed flower. I placed both letters on the pedestal and looked up. The portrait had deepened. Not changed. Deepened. The shadows of the background seemed less obedient, as if they had loosened their arrangement to make room for light. If anyone watching has ever found something hidden in a house you thought you knew, I murmured. Tell me. Tell me what it did to you. The room answered with quiet, the kind that makes sound unnecessary. When I slid the backing board into place and tightened the screws, the wood did not resist. The frame made a tiny sound when it settled. A relieved sound. Like a joint set right. By morning, Vivian had gathered herself into the shape of a woman for whom nothing unexpected ever happens. She moved through the kitchen with efficient silence, pulling open drawers, stacking keys and papers into neat piles, building order against whatever chaos she felt. I heard you, she said. In the night. What did you hear? You, in the hall, talking to that thing on the wall. I let the truth be simple. I found letters. From Margaret. And from Mother. And you thought it best to go prying without me. The old steel entered her voice, the kind that gets stronger when it feels wronged. I thought it best to listen when listening was possible. She closed the drawer with more force than it needed. You always confuse feeling with virtue. There is a difference? Her mouth curved at one corner in something that wanted to be a smile and failed. Bring them, she said. Let us end this romance with facts. I brought the letters to the hall. Sunlight came late on that side of the house. The stained glass threw low bands of blue across the floorboards. Vivian stood with her back straight and her chin lifted, the posture of a woman who has never been uncertain longer than propriety allows. I read the letters aloud. I did not embellish. I did not interpret. I watched her face for the small betrayals, a muscle tightening near the eye, the breath held too long, the swallow that arrives before the body prepares. She gave me very little. But the portrait gave me more. As I spoke the line, we paint what we cannot forgive, the gold that had traced the inner frame returned, brighter than before. It moved in a thin, living current, like light in a vein. It was not theatrical. It was undeniable. Vivian stared straight ahead. Not at me. At the woman above us. What trick is this? She asked. Her voice stretched thin, like glass under pressure. No trick. The varnish is old. Light refracts on imperfect polish. Candles distort shadows. You know these things. You teach them. I teach what can be measured, I said. This is what is real. The same thing then? No, I answered, softer than I intended. Not always. We stood in the kind of silence that does not allow escape. Something in the painting adjusted, scarcely visible, an alteration less of shape than of atmosphere. When I took one slow step closer, warmth lifted off the canvas like summer in a sealed room. When Vivian, despite herself, moved in as well, the warmth thinned into cool air, and the color in the matriarch's eyes dulled half a shade. I felt it as a refusal. Gentle, immediate, clear. Vivian felt it as insult. You brought your theatrics into this house, she said, and it responds to you because you want it to. I wanted us to hear it together. She laughed without sound. When you left, she said, you told yourself it was courage. When I stayed, I told myself it was love. Mother believed me. The town believed me. That is how names are preserved, by those who know how to be seen doing it. Is that what you think this is? Being seen? She did not answer, or she could not. Sometimes the difference ruins entire lives. In the afternoon, the sky went white. Wind raced low across the fields, and the house settled deeper into its foundation as if bracing for a confession. I took the letters back to the library and laid them flat beneath a sheet of glass, the way I would with fragile drawings in the studio. I wanted to protect them without imprisoning them, to let their voices remain in the air. When I returned to the hall, the portrait had shifted again. Not the face. Not the tilt of the head. The background, those dark, obedient shadows, had thinned at the edges. You would not see it if you were not looking for it. But I was looking for it with my whole life. The darker band closest to the right shoulder now held a thread of blue I had never noticed. Not a painter's accident. Not damage. A path. Mother saw this, I whispered. She saw the path and was afraid to name it. I do not know why I used the word afraid. Perhaps because I could taste fear in the finish of the room, the kind that smells like starch and lavender, and the closing of curtains at noon. By dusk, Vivian had arranged the study the way our mother would have liked it for a guest. Chairs aligned, papers squared, pen aligned with the grain. She stood there with her hand on the back of the chair and looked toward the hall. Not at me. I do not think she remembered I was there. Are you waiting for her to move again? I asked. I am waiting for this house to return to normal, she said. Maybe this is normal. I will not live at the mercy of atmospheres. Her certainty was the purest thing about her, and the most fragile. She crossed the threshold and entered the hall. As her heel touched the parquet, the light on the portrait went cool, the kind of gray that steals color from skin. Her reflection, faint in the varnish, simplified, as reflections do in flat light. And yet another shadow took hold along the lower left of the canvas. It did not touch the face.
It gathered near the brooch, where the matriarch's throat met the line of her collar. The shadow darkened a shade. Not violence, not spectacle. A closed door where a window had been. Vivian stopped, not because she saw it, but because her body did. Sometimes the truth reaches the skin before the mind. You have made this place hysterical, she said, quiet and edged. It was always sane when Mother was alive. Mother's sanity, I said,
was a kind of devotion to arrangement. She arranged things so we could be proud. She arranged things so we could be spared. Spared from what? From seeing. My voice surprised me. It sounded like a chord struck on an old instrument that had not been tuned and yet remembered its pitch. Night settled like an apology. We ate without speaking, as if words would stain what the house was trying to keep clean. Later, I returned alone to the hall and lit one candle for the portrait and another for the letters, which were not in the room, but deserved the light anyway. I opened Margaret's notebook and read her lines out loud, letting each one pass through air that had known them once before. A woman learns to breathe through what she does not say. If she ever tells it, the silence will have to be remade, and that is a kind of labor men do not believe exists. The house listened as houses do, through their weight and their wood, and the history of every breath they have held. From the landing above, there came the softest sound, not a creak, a step, then the brush again. One stroke, patient, finishing something it had waited decades to complete. I closed the notebook and stood. The gold along the inner frame brightened, and then steadied, as if agreeing to be only as visible as bravery allowed. Mother, I said to the air that smelled like jasmine and promises. I will keep the heart. Help me keep the name. The flame leaned toward the canvas, and then corrected itself, as if reminding me that light is not obedience, it is attention. If you have carried a secret for a family that taught you to preserve names more carefully than truth, I am listening. We are many. Some of us are finally opening frames we were told never to touch. Upstairs, a door closed. The sound was not angry. It was not kind. It was the sound of a line acknowledging itself. I rested my palm against the wall beside the portrait, expecting cool plaster. Warmth rose from within as if the house had a fever that did not harm but cleansed. Then let us make a new silence, I whispered. One that tells the truth. I do not know if the portrait nodded, but the shadow at the brooch lifted half a shade, and the thread of blue in the background brightened enough to be called a path without shame. Stay with me if you need a companion in this kind of night. If these echoes are finding you at the right hour, you already know the way back here. Perfect. Vou seguir a mesma program, vós em primeira pessoa, densidade cinematográfica, ritmo pratitia sinocritskritz, singabreviações, conceithia sucis, yamação crescent. Nesta parte, o retrato escalo, o campanar dat fa casa con man and confirmed a física samáica, the tin had enlisted. The Dane began with the quiet that follows a confession. Outside, the rain had turned to mist, threading itself between the trees like a lingering thought. Vivienne had not spoken to me since last night. Her silence was not absence. It was a structure. It filled the rooms the way our mother's rules once did. I made tea I did not drink. The spoon clinked against porcelain like a clock refusing to rest. Every sound was amplified in that old house. The drip in the kitchen sink, the sigh of the floorboards, the faint hum behind the walls. Even the air had a pulse. And beneath it all, the same rhythm, constant, deliberate. The breath of the portrait. Vivienne entered the hall mid-morning. She was dressed impeccably again. Beige wool, pearls, the uniform of composure. Her face was pale, but her voice held its usual control. I have decided, she said. We will move the portrait. It dominates the room. Mother was sentimental. I prefer a space that breathes. Her choice of words was curious. Breathes, as if she knew the house was already doing that. I set my cup down. Move it? Yes. I want it upstairs, in the east room. There is better light. There is no light in that room, I said. She ignored me. I have already called the caretaker from town. He will bring the tools. The air thickened as she spoke. A faint current rippled through the space between us, like invisible thread tightening. The candle flame on the table stretched toward the portrait, and then bent away, as though the air itself had changed direction. Vivienne, I said carefully. Perhaps it should stay where it is. Some things belong to their place. Do not start with your mysticism again. It is a painting, not a deity. Her words hit the silence like stones on water, each one sinking quickly, leaving ripples that would take time to disappear. The caretaker arrived by noon, a man too young to understand the house's age. He smelled of rain and tobacco. Vivienne gave precise instructions, standing with her arms folded. He nodded, polite but indifferent. Then he touched the frame. The first screw refused to turn. He tried again. The screwdriver slipped. He frowned, muttered something about rust. But when he pressed harder, the handle snapped clean in half. Vivienne sighed, impatient. Use the crowbar, then. I felt the word before I heard it. The way an animal feels the tremor of earth before a storm. No, I said quickly. But she was already waving her hand. Do it. The wood will mend. The past is not sacred, Eleanor. It is furniture. The man set the edge of the bar against the frame. The moment metal touched wood, a sound filled the room. Low, resonant, Not quite thunder, not quite wind. The chandelier above us swayed gently, though the air was still. He stopped, startled. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Vivian forced a laugh. "Old foundations. Go on." He pushed harder. The frame gave a sigh, or something like one, and the first corner lifted. Then the candle flames all around us flickered out at once. The room plunged into shadow. I remember the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence that remembers itself. Old, sentient, exact. In that dark, I could hear everything else. My heartbeat, the drip of rain outside, the shallow tremor of breath that was not mine. The caretaker stepped back. "Ma'am, maybe we should—" Vivian cut him off. "Finish it." He reached for the top edge again, but before he touched it, the frame slipped, not falling, just shifting, and the entire weight of it tilted toward him. He stumbled, caught himself, but the canvas swung forward, as if propelled by unseen wind. It hit the ground with a sound that was neither break nor impact. It was closer to exhalation. The man cursed softly, steadying himself. Vivian darted forward. "Be careful. It is priceless." When she bent to lift it, the portrait shifted again, slipping from her grip. The lower edge struck her arm. She fell, catching herself with one hand, her face inches from the painted woman's eyes. "Vivian," I called, rushing to her. The caretaker stepped back, frightened. Vivian was trembling. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Then she whispered, just one word, "Mother." The sound of it cracked the air open. I knelt beside her. The portrait lay across both of us now, the canvas cool against my skin. For an instant, the world tilted. The air turned electric, the room breathing faster, deeper. And then I saw it. The image shifting before my eyes. The matriarch was gone. In her place, two young women, side by side, Vivian and me. But only one of us, only I, had her eyes open. The other figure was beautiful, serene, asleep. Her face a mask of peace that carried no life. Vivian gasped, covering her mouth. Her tears came sudden, uncontrollable. "No," she whispered. "No. It cannot." But it had. The house had painted its verdict. The caretaker fled without a word. The front door slammed, leaving us alone with the breathing walls. Vivian's body shook. I wanted to hold her, but she flinched as if my touch might burn. "Why you?" she said. Her voice was not anger. It was grief wearing confusion. "I do not know. You always had to be the one who felt things more deeply, the one who saw meaning in everything. And now even the dead agree with you." Her words broke something in me, but not in the way she intended. I saw her. Really saw her. For the first time since we were children. A woman built of glass and duty, trying not to shatter. The house trembled slightly. The sound of the storm outside returned, distant thunder crawling across the moors. A beam of light pierced the gray sky and fell through the stained glass, striking the portrait directly. The colors deepened, crimson, gold, ivory. The painted eyes of my younger self looked almost alive. Vivian's reflection, faint in the varnish, seemed to flicker and fade. She stood, unsteady. "I am leaving," she said. "This place is mad. You are mad." "Vivian, wait." But she was already climbing the stairs, clutching the railing with one hand, the other pressed to her chest. Halfway up, she stopped. "Keep the house if you want it," she said without turning. "It has already chosen you." Then she disappeared into the upper corridor. The hall was still. Only the rain remained, soft and unending. I sat beside the fallen portrait, tracing the edge of the frame with my fingers. The warmth returned. Not searing, not frightening, but familiar, like the warmth of a mother's hand. "Is this what you wanted?" I whispered to the painted faces. The young Eleanor did not answer. Her eyes were calm, steady, unblinking. But behind her, the background had changed once again. The path of blue light I had seen before had widened, stretching upward like a column of air, leading into a horizon that did not exist in the original painting. It looked alive. It looked free. If you are still here, perhaps you have felt it too. The moment something invisible decides to show you its truth. The moment you realize the past was never sleeping, only waiting for you to look long enough. That night, the rain fell harder. Vivian's door remained closed. I stayed by the portrait until the candles melted down to wax ghosts. And in the hush that followed, I heard the sound again. The one that had started all of this. The soft drag of a brush. But now it came from inside the painting. One slow stroke, then another. As if the work was not yet done. And when I looked up, the gold thread along the frame pulsed once, then faded. Not gone, only resting. I whispered, "Then finish it. I am here." The air answered with warmth, and the house exhaled. Perfeito. Asta e a parti synchro. Inheritance of light. Discreton amusimitam poetico e cinematografico de her inner echoes. In primera pessoa. Eleanor. Dancer emocional. Yochimizada pariteta es in a CapCut. Sing a your songs. Come hitimo hisnurada e pausas matarais. Aqui, o conflito se transforming perdo. And compravi racinao se havala comer morno sister. The morning after the fall, the house was quieter than I had ever known it. The kind of quiet that follows revelation, not emptiness, but consequence. Light spilled through the stained glass like water made visible. The rain had ended, yet everything still dripped with memory. I woke to the smell of earth and oil paint, the scent that had lived in my mother's hands. Vivian did not come downstairs. Her door remained closed, but I could feel her sorrow through the walls. Grief has its own frequency, and when you have shared a lifetime with someone, you can hear it even in silence. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup that had gone cold. The portrait lay against the far wall, face turned upward, catching the light. I could not look away from it, because the longer I watched, the more it seemed to breathe again. Calm now, almost serene, as if satisfied that something had finally been spoken. I carried the portrait back to its rightful place in the hall, not as possession, as offering. The frame was heavier than I remembered, but the weight felt right, familiar, almost maternal. When I set it against the wall, the air shimmered faintly, the way heat bends distance on summer roads. The image had settled again. The matriarch returned, but softer. Her eyes less commanding, her smile unburdened. And beneath the paint, I could sense it. The echo of us. Vivian, mother, me. 3 generations, threaded through the same brushstrokes of unfinished love. By mid-morning, I found the courage to open the last drawer of my mother's writing desk. Inside were bundles of letters wrapped in ivory ribbon, carefully dated, but never sent. Her handwriting was unmistakable, slanted and elegant, each word a prayer to be understood. I untied one ribbon. The paper trembled in my hands, thin and translucent. The ink had bled faintly, as if tears had passed over it once. To my daughters, if you are reading this, then the silence has lasted longer than I hoped. I loved you both in ways that were never equal. Because love cannot always be fair when filtered through fear. I gave Vivian what I could name. Security. Praise. A mirror she could trust. I gave Eleanor what I could not. The truth, which I buried in paint and dreams. One day, one of you will find it. When you do, remember this. The house keeps what the heart hides. I read it twice, my breath catching on every word. She had written what she could not say while alive. And in those few lines, the entire shape of our family revealed itself. A story of women who loved through control, who protected through silence, who preserved beauty, even when they could not bear its cost. I carried the letters upstairs. Vivian was sitting on the edge of her bed, her hair undone, her face pale and swollen from crying. She did not look up when I entered. "I found her letters," I said softly. She did not answer. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers tangled in the hem of her sleeve. The same nervous habit she had as a child when she wanted to speak, but feared what her voice might do. I sat beside her, leaving space between us, the kind of distance that invites rather than divides. "She loved you," I said. "She loved both of us. She just did not know how to love in the same language." Vivian's eyes filled again. "I did everything she wanted. Everything. I stayed. I kept the house. I kept the name." "I know." "Then why does it feel like she chose you?" "Maybe she did not choose either of us. Maybe she chose truth." Vivian turned toward me for the first time. Her face was fragile and real. She said the house would belong to the one who preserved the name. I thought that meant me. I shook my head. It meant the one who would let it breathe. We sat together in the stillness. The afternoon light began to drift through the window. Slow, golden, forgiving. In that silence, I heard it again. The same soft hum I had felt from the beginning. The rhythm beneath the walls. Now steady, peaceful, warm. The house was not angry. It had simply been waiting for resonance. I opened another letter, one written in our mother's later years. It was not addressed, only titled, "For Whoever Listens." "The heart remembers beauty, because beauty is what forgives it." I thought inheritance meant keeping things alive by holding on. But life is kept alive by release. If you find this, do not guard what I guarded. Guard what I forgot to see. That love must move to stay real. Vivian reached for the paper. Her hands trembled as she held it, eyes scanning the words as if she could read them into forgiveness. When she finished, she said, "I do not want the house." "You do not have to," I answered. "Perhaps we were never meant to keep it, only to free it." Her shoulders shook, the release breaking through years of tension. I held her hand, this time without resistance. And for the first time in decades, I felt my sister's pulse align with mine. We brought the letters downstairs together. Vivian set one candle on the pedestal beside the portrait, and I lit another. Two flames, side by side, not equal, but companioned. The golden light touched the canvas, and the matriarch's face brightened once more. The shadows in the background faded completely. For the first time, I saw what had always been hidden there. Faint outlines of other faces, like a gathering behind her, generations of women standing quietly in the light. Vivian gasped. "Do you see it?" "Yes," I whispered. "They were never gone. They were only waiting for us to stop arguing over the door." The candlelight wavered as if stirred by breath. The warmth that filled the hall was unmistakable now. Not haunting, not spectral, but loving. An inheritance of presence. I spoke aloud, not to the painting, but to the space between us all. To the women who kept this name, who carried its silence, who guarded its beauty, we see you. We release you. We forgive you. Vivian echoed the last word. Forgive. Her voice broke as she said it, and in that crack, something ancient softened. The frame shimmered briefly, pulse of gold light spreading outward until even the air seemed luminous. The portrait was still, yet alive. The matriarch smiling, her eyes finally at peace. If you are listening now, maybe you know this too. that sometimes forgiveness does not come as a decision, but as a temperature change. The room warms, the body exhales, and you realize the wound was never asking to close, only to be held long enough to breathe. Vivian left the next morning. She kissed my forehead before stepping into the mist. Her suitcase small, her pace slow. There was no anger in her now, only release. Before she turned the corner, she looked back once and smiled. The same smile the portrait had given me the first night. When she was gone, I stood alone in the hall. The silence was clear, almost holy. The gold in the frame still glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat at rest. I realized then what my mother meant. The inheritance was never the house, never the name. It was the capacity to hold beauty without turning it into possession. To witness. To remember. To love without needing to keep. If this story has found you, maybe it is because you are holding something too. A memory, a name, a silence that no longer fits. Maybe it is time to release it, because some legacies are painted in oil, and others in forgiveness. But fate. A Gurdendrum is at the ultima part, the unveiling. Momento hitualish quinquiai ransa vibração la consagrada. Aqui, a casa se torna temple, a arte se torna portadora da cor, e ela não deixa de ser observador, ela se transforma a guardiã do campo. A escrita mantém mensam toma duro, poético, imaginativo, pronto para teteia sino capacuts, sem abrevia saint. Brigade to Brigaspiga Driga Sainta de Simbraliga. It takes 3 gays turn a house to Sainabriga. Na and sinus. In peace. The air had changed texture, like fabric newly washed of its scent. I could move through the rooms without the echo of resistance following me. Every door opened easily, every floorboard sounded like agreement. I spent those days in a kind of reverent quiet. No music, no distractions, only the gentle rhythm of the wind and the creak of old bones made of wood. The portrait remained in the hall, glowing softly as if it had learned to breathe without me. On the 4th day, I knew it was time. Not because of any sign or voice, but because the house began to hum again. A low vibration that seemed to call for completion. I woke before dawn. The horizon was still blue with sleep. A thin mist floated across the fields, the kind that erases edges, turning everything into memory. I bathed, dressed in simple linen, and walked barefoot to the hall. The floor was cold, but the air around the portrait was warm. Not heat, but presence. I could smell wax, paint, and rain. It was the scent of endings that turn into beginnings. I began cleaning the room first, dusting every surface, wiping each corner, sweeping away what was no longer needed. It felt less like cleaning and more like translation, turning residue into space. When the floor was bare, I placed 7 candles in a semicircle before the portrait. Each one represented something I had come to understand: truth, forgiveness, memory, voice, lineage, beauty, and release. Their flames flickered in unison, as if they shared a single breath. The house exhaled with them. I opened Margaret's notebook again, the one with the ink that still remembered emotion.
The pages fell open to a passage I had never read before, written in her most deliberate hand. When the eyes of blood close, the eyes of the heart begin to see. The inheritance of women is not gold nor land, but the vision to find light inside darkness. If ever you reach this line, speak it aloud, not as prayer, but as truth. I whispered the words into the candlelight.
The air rippled, gentle, but real. The flame nearest the center leaned forward and steadied, its color shifting from amber to white. The portrait shimmered faintly. It was no longer just the matriarch I saw. The paint seemed translucent now, layered like memory over light. Behind her form, New images were rising. Faint outlines of hands, of faces, of patterns older than the house itself. The background that once held shadows was now luminous. Threads of gold woven into blue, the same tone I had seen forming over days, now blooming into fullness. I felt my knees give slightly, and I sat on the floor, the candlelight pooling around me like water. The warmth in the air intensified, not burning, but encompassing. A pulse, deep and steady, moved through the wood beneath me. It was the same rhythm I had heard in my chest since the first night, the dialogue between flesh and memory, between heart and heritage. I closed my eyes and spoke softly. For the women who painted silence into beauty, for the daughters who carried it, for the mothers who mistook fear for love, may all be seen now, may all be light. The words left my mouth as sound but returned as vibration, traveling through the floor, the air, the portrait itself. When I opened my eyes, the transformation was complete. The matriarch's expression had changed, not subtly this time, but entirely. Her features were radiant, the sternness gone. Her gaze was not downward anymore. She was looking forward, directly at me. And behind her, the dark background had dissolved into gold. The brush strokes no longer hid. They revealed. From the ceiling above, dust caught in the candlelight and spiraled slowly, like snow falling in reverse. I realized then that the house itself had become part of the portrait. The air, the walls, the floor, all glowing with the same hue. Vivian's voice echoed faintly from upstairs, calling my name, once softly. There was no fear in it, only release. I stood and approached the canvas. The gold light reflected on my skin, on the tears I had not realized were falling. It was not sadness anymore. It was awe, the kind that humbles and repairs at once. I touched the lower edge of the frame. It was warm, pulsing with life. And when I whispered thank you, the entire room responded. The candles flaring together, the light expanding for a heartbeat, then softening again. The portrait no longer needed to prove anything. It simply existed. Whole, clear, alive. Like truth finally finding a form that could hold it. Tell me, if you are still here, have you ever stood in front of something, a painting, a place, a memory, and felt it recognize you back, that quiet shock of being seen by what you thought was lifeless? That is what the unveiling truly is. It is not ceremony. It is encounter. Night returned softly. I left the candles burning low and sat near the window. Outside, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The moon hung full and pale above the moors, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes moving along the horizon. Faint outlines of women walking in the mist, their steps light, their heads lifted. Maybe they were memories, maybe they were ancestors returning home through forgiveness. Either way, the sight did not frighten me. It comforted me. I whispered into the night, "Go in peace. We have remembered you." When I turned back, the portrait looked new, as if painted an hour ago. The colors were vibrant, alive with breath. And yet, something within it had stilled completely. No movement, no shimmer. Only calm, like a wound closed by light. I understood then that the ritual was not mine alone. The house had needed it. The lineage had needed it. And somewhere beyond the reach of time, a circle of women had finally exhaled. Stay with this moment if you need to. Do not rush the light when it arrives. Let it linger. Let it name you gently. Because sometimes, the unveiling is not what we do to the world. It is what the world does to us, when we finally stop hiding. Months have passed since the house awakened. Time moves differently here now. Slower, clearer, as if it no longer counts the days, but measures breaths. The air feels lighter. Even the dust shines. I no longer sleep in the upstairs bedroom. I moved my things to the study, where the morning sun touches the floor first. That is where I write, where I remember, where I let silence speak before I do. The house is not heavy anymore. It hums softly, like a satisfied soul. And sometimes, when the wind moves through the corridors, it carries a faint scent of jasmine and turpentine, a reminder that the past does not vanish. It transforms. Vivian writes now. Letters mostly. Long ones. They arrive every few weeks, sealed with the same blue ribbon that once bound our mother's words. Her handwriting has changed. Looser, gentler, as if she has stopped trying to impress anyone, even herself. She tells me she walks by the sea in the mornings. She is learning to cook for one. That she has begun painting again. Not portraits, but light. Nothing lasts, she wrote in her last letter. But perhaps that is what makes beauty honest. When I read her words, I smiled. Because that is the voice of someone who has forgiven themselves for surviving. I decided to open the house once more. Not as inheritance, but as invitation. The lawyer called it an unconventional decision. He asked if I was sure I wanted strangers walking through our family home. I told him that nothing heals by being locked away. So now, every weekend, the doors open. People come. Students, travelers, neighbors from the village. They step softly through the rooms, speaking in whispers, as if instinctively aware that the walls still remember prayers. I do not charge admission. I call it the Ward Gallery of Living Memory. In the main hall, the portrait hangs exactly where it always did. But the light around it is different now. It glows from within, gentle but certain, as if the woman inside has finally found her rest. Sometimes, visitors stand in silence for long minutes, unsure why they are moved. I see them touch their own chests without realizing it, as though recognizing the same pulse that beats through the brushstrokes. That is how I know the inheritance is working. One afternoon, a young woman lingered long after the others had left. She stood before the portrait, head tilted, eyes glassy. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "She looks like my grandmother," she said. "She even has the same brooch." I smiled. "Then maybe she came to remind you that your story matters too." The woman nodded slowly. Before leaving, she whispered a thank you. Not to me, but to the painting. When the door closed behind her, the sunlight shifted across the frame, and I could have sworn the matriarch's smile deepened once more. In the evenings, when the house empties and the candles burn low, I sit by the window and write. Not about ghosts or grief. Those have become teachers now. I write about light, and the way forgiveness makes it move. I write about art as breath, about lineage as vibration, about how every story is just another attempt to remember love correctly. Sometimes I imagine my mother sitting across from me, pen in hand, smiling in that restrained way of hers, as if proud that I finally learned how to keep the name without carrying the weight. Tonight, as I write these final words, the portrait gleams softly behind me. Its colors are different now, richer, freer, as if the oil itself had been waiting to learn a new language. In the reflection of the glass, I see not one figure, but three. The matriarch, my mother, and me. No hierarchy. No shadow. Just continuity. The house no longer holds secrets. It holds breath. It holds light. If you have listened until the end, maybe you have felt it too. The quiet healing that happens when the truth is no longer a threat. The way forgiveness turns memory into wisdom. The way love, once released, finds its way back as peace. Because some legacies are painted in oil, and others in forgiveness.